Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. Welcome. We have a very special guest today, Merle Hinrich, who is both the founder and the chairman for Hinrich Foundation, is with us today, and we're going to have a conversation to talk about his life, how he has really lived a life dedicated to improving and increasing global trade. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Hinrich Foundation as well, so that you're aware of it, so that you can benefit from that. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We were chatting a little bit before this Globinar started, and one of the things that Mr. Hinrich and I have in alignment is the Thunderbird School of Global Management, which was played a key part in the life of Merle Hinrich and really kind of kicked things off for him earlier. I don't think it was called Thunderbird at the time, but way back in 1965, a young man received a scholarship to go and learn about the world, and Merle Hinrich took that opportunity. And so Merle, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm today in Scottsdale, as we established, and you're in Singapore. And so appreciate the cross-world conversation. I'd like to start with the question that's kind of been bugging me as I've looked at your biography over the last several weeks is, how does somebody who's a young man in Nebraska end up even getting offered something from Thunderbird and international business? And then, what was your feeling back in those days about international trade and international business? Was it mostly fortuitous, or was there something more planned behind all of that?
Doug, thank you for having me this morning. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. Life for me has been a series of little accidents, that have taken me different but after I graduated from Thunderbird in '64, and I took a job in Tokyo. Having studied French, I took a job in Tokyo that was with the East Asia Publishing Company that had a publication called the Importer Magazine. And that was my introduction to Asia. They were promoting exports, and it gave me an opportunity to visit all of the developing countries at that time. But we were very focused upon helping companies develop their exports. And in actual fact, it was in 1965 that I first came to Singapore when they had the pioneer status here, and they were developing an area called the Jurong Estate, with which we were assisting them to do. So as I said, it's just been a series of ongoing events and engagement, which has been most enjoyable, and I've enjoyed the ride.
Well, we often at Global Chamber talk about accidental exporting, how companies, they come up and they do their work, and then suddenly they're exporting to Germany and they don't know how that happened. So I think what you're saying is, to some degree, a lot of that was somewhat fortuitous, and it just kind of evolved, and there were opportunities presented to you, and it sounded like a good choice.
That is largely the case, Doug. I think the first thing, of course, that were involved was in the press and in publishing, because that was the primary media at that time. And I was quite interested in publishing. In fact, I had a background in radio and television and newspapers when I was working or when I was going to school. So this was sort of a continuation of engaging in the publishing area. But fortunately, after having finished Thunderbird, became much more involved in the international trade aspects of it, and the sourcing area, with which at that time was primarily done by import agents. Right, we didn't have the massive participation of manufacturers and retailers and a host of other channels, but was focused upon simply the importer. Right.
Along the way, I mean, that was a long time ago, and you've done a lot of different activities since then. When did this start to form in your own mind to be hey, I want to make an impact, a bigger impact on the world of global trade. Because as we read the Hinrich Foundation and the values and what principles you're looking to live, you're really making a difference, and you want to make a bigger difference. You probably didn't have that visualization in the early days. How would you kind of characterize the stages of your career, and when did you start to say, hey, we have the opportunity to do something bigger here?
Very good question, Doug. I sincerely enjoyed what I was doing, first of all, and enjoying interacting and interfacing with really the grassroots of the manufacturing industries in Asia. From really, at that time, it was typically from Japan to Singapore. And that involvement provided me an insight into the contribution that trade was making to Asia, the alleviation of poverty. I was largely involved in South Korea, and that wasn't all that long after the Korean War. I was very much involved in Taiwan at the very early stages of its export development, and in Hong Kong, and then later more actively in Singapore as well. So it was with that sort of background that was evolving in my life. And unfortunately, the president from at East Asia Publishing Company, who was also from Thunderbird many years prior, and had also from Nebraska, of all things. Wow. Unfortunately, he passed away at a very young age of 44, and I had to make a decision as to whether or not that I would continue on in Asia, or look for a position with a company that was involved in Asia, or simply return to the U.S. And it wasn't an easy decision, because I certainly didn't have the wherewithal to launch out on my own, etc. But I did have, having participated in this trade development as long as I had, there was total clarity that the electronics industry was evolving very quickly, and it needed new channels of export promotion, and I felt that I could do a good job of that. So I borrowed and begged enough money to put it all together. And we started a publication. Initially, it was a general merchandise publication, but we quickly segued into the electronics industry. And that was, that was fortuitous, because the electronics industry absolutely exploded across Asia, and companies from, I should say at that point, companies from Japan to Singapore were looking for how they were going to evolve and how they were going to grow, and what markets that they would be able to serve. And I remember that one of the most sophisticated products that was being exported out of Hong Kong was a six transistor radio, of all things. Successfully, mind you. Then they went into the clock business and what have you. That was in early 1970s. So one thing really led to another. We took the electronics industry and we continued to specialize our publications into certain segmentations. For example, there was as you well remember, there was a timepiece industry in Asia, and we had a timepiece publication. And then there was a computer. Of course, the computer industry exploded, and all the supportive parts, assemblies, and what have you, were manufactured either in Japan or in Taiwan or in South Korea. And Taiwan became a substantial assembly area. So we did very well in the computer industry. In fact, Acer was one of our first customers, and TSMC was as well, or it was known differently at that time. So it was, again, very fortuitous. And what we did is the evolution of that is that we decided that another need for communications was in the area of component parts, electronic component parts, from both active to passive components. So we launched a publication for electronic components, which was incredibly successful. and we did different editions of that. Then later on, we did an electronic engineering publication, which in part was sort of a reverse engineering publication. And we got into the very early stages of the ideation of product, the development of product, where people could find the components for product and where we could assist them in distributing that product or promoting that product globally. So that was, that was the kickoff stage. So the 1970s, 1980s were big years, really big years for us. And then it evolved into an online offering very quickly. We were actually the first organization is under Global Sources, the first company in Asia to have a relational database that people could come to online and sort by product. So we actually developed it because there was no site available. And we developed a structure where companies from all over the world coming through the internet could actually identify specific product specific to their particular needs. That has been copied and emulated by some of my big competitors, including the Trade Development Council in Hong Kong and Alibaba and JDE and a host of others. But that structure still stands. That structure still is in place. We went to China was a big jump. We spent a lot of time in China, but there were substantial issues of foreign participation in China, with which is yet another subject. But we refocused our industry, or refocused on trade shows, and we developed a whole series of trade shows, first in Shanghai and then in Hong Kong. And then we did trade shows around the world for a number of Asian companies as well. I don't know, is that enough of the history, Doug?
No, I'm glad you mentioned about Global Sources, because I was curious how that related then, clearly a big stepping stone along the way, for sure, right? That was, and many different iterations of that in a lot of different segments that you were able to develop.
Now, the first publications were called Asian Sources because it was very much focused on Asia. And as it evolved, of course, there were more global participants. So we broke it out. We broke it out to say basically Global Sources. That was the trademark for the publication. And we had, Global Sources for all sorts of electronic products. And there were many, many different channels for those products. There were, of course, the direct export of product, and then there were products that were exported through importers or retailers and then re-exported. For example, Panama was a huge re-exporter of electronic products for South America for many years, which it is still today in textiles, various products. Yeah. Got it.
So at some point along the way, did you end up divesting that, or are you still part of that? How does that still connect or not connect to you today?
Well, we sold Blackstone. We sold Global Sources to Blackstone about 4 years ago. Okay. They were anxious to participate in the trade show business, with which hindsight, of course, is I'm glad that we fortuitously, again, we exited at the right time. And now I'm spending the majority of my time, free time, if you wish, on foundation-related issues, which are all focused upon sustainable trade and hopefully mutually beneficial, because that's the only way it's ever going to be sustainable.
I'm glad you brought that up, because you do talk about sustainable trade and also mutually beneficial. And in the writings, one of the favorite phrases that I saw on the Hinrich Foundation website is something that I hear at Thunderbird a lot. The basic idea that countries that do trade with each other very rarely need soldiers. I think it's done more eloquently both on your website and the Thunderbird site. But the basic idea that there's something good about trade, and yet, many times, even in the U.S. these days, sometimes trade is looked at as a bad thing, and maybe that's a result of people's perceptions or feeling like it's not mutually beneficial. So you've seen a lot of transition over the years, right, of how people have perceived globalness and global trade. Where do you think we are today?
Well, we are far, far ahead economically and in well-being than we were 30, 40 years ago.
We are.
For a start. And trade, global trade, has been a large component of that success. We would not have the economic well-being that we have. We would not have the industries we have, and we would certainly not have had or seen the alleviation of poverty in Asia and elsewhere that we have seen. So trade, yes, there are positive spillovers and unfortunately negative spillovers. And I think what we have seen over the course of the last 20 years, and even before that, we have seen trade that has evolved that has not been mutually beneficial. And I use that word broadly, but I use it frequently. And that there are constituents that have participated that feel that the job loss and the pressures that have been brought on industry, certain industry within U.S. and within Europe, et cetera, do not justify the level of participation that they have previously, how they had previously supported global trade. There's been, and unfortunately, I think that we have not had a global organization. The WTO has suffered. It is moribund. It is not led the need, the representation of trade that it should have. And I would say that is substantiated, that is largely substantiated by the fact that we have seen an incredible number of FTAs, free trade agreements that are either bilateral or they're plurilateral that have evolved. And a few of those are TPP and the CPTPP and the RCEP and the USMCA, and all of these trade agreements are specific to either trading partners or regions. Now, frankly, I think that is for the better, because if they had not, then there would have been even more difficulty within the global trade arena. Now, some of those, are continuing to struggle, but at least they're attempting and they're growing. And one of I would say, maybe we can come back to it if you wish, but is in the trade agreements that Singapore now has established for electronic trading. DIPA is one of them here. And I think that really is a huge, it's a role model, and it is a path to enhanced trade facilitation, data and trade facilitation. So we are seeing, we're seeing the outcropping of solutions to what only a few years ago looked like a moribund situation, right? So I think I'm quite I'm not exuberant, but I am quite positive of the continued growth of global trade, though there has been a more recent setback in the last couple of years, and that that setback has been caused by the political issues between the United States and China, needless to say, and Trump's election and the response to trade with China. But it has also been exacerbated by COVID-19, and that has demonstrated the issue of safety, the issue of having access or fair access, if you wish, and it is also exacerbated the issues of protectionism, unfortunately, and that protectionism is specific to a particular industry, but should not be the driving force for countries that still wish to develop their trade, their global trade. And more recently, of course, is the UK's exit from the EU, with which has also put in question a number of supply chains. And I think the if I can look at the positive side of the outcome, there has been an enhanced awareness of the criticality of global trade to the supply chains. But equally so, the supply chains that serve the world's needs for food and commodities and product, etc., have been extremely resilient. Extremely resilient. Not that the supply chains were never static, mind you, because every industry is constantly changing, sourcing and assembling and exporting, etc. So the flexibility had already exists, but I think that it was put to the test. It was really put to the test over the course of the last couple of years, and has demonstrated an incredible capacity for correcting it, correcting issues. Both from a supply to assembly. And I would, I'd equally say, even though that we're seeing container rates at $10,000 a container across the Pacific, which is humongous, which is a huge, but it's a reflection of how the supply chain has actually been able to deal with some of the problems, right? Not that it will correct. I mean, it's not going to be at 10,000 for an indefinite period of time, and it will correct. It maybe is another 6 months or another year, but it will adjust. And so very fortunate we've had the flexibility globally to deal with some very, very stressful issues.
Yeah, really, really good points. When you were talking about the number of FTAs, free trade agreements that have come up, and I think actually, as I think back, about a year and a half ago, we did an event at Thunderbird where we had a conversation about free trade agreements. And I believe the number is somewhere around 400 or 350 or 400 in the world, something like that was the number that was thrown out there. So when you brought that up and your point about the WTO, were you kind of also saying that there could be something like the WTO or even the WTO itself that could have or could be creating other mechanisms and agreements where these things don't need to be done? And really these things were done because they need to be done, right? There's downward momentum to make it happen. I think it was Kofi Annan who said, if you're going to argue against globalization, you might as well argue against gravity. It's happening and there's nothing to stop it.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. It's out of necessity. Trade is out of necessity as well. And the representation of the policy and trade agreements are out of need as well. And in fact, unfortunately, it's always a bit behind the curve. And I would say, it would be very fortunate, for example, in this period where we're faced with huge technology changes, especially with electronic trade facilitation as one example, and the use and the storing of data, that it would be far better to get ahead of the curve than behind the curve. It would be better to help facilitate trade than to impinge upon trade. It would be certainly far better to come to some kind of conclusion and agreement upon cross-border trade transactions, right? And this is an area that perplexes me and concerns me, and we're doing research on this, or we're working on research on it. Is that the biggest group, and unfortunately that I think will be affected negatively, is the SMEs. The SMEs have had a wonderful windfall opportunity with the internet and with the cross-border trade of getting started with export development. I mean, exporting ones and twos and threes and fours using FedEx or DHL or what have you. And that has been very, very beneficial because it's a learning process. It's a learning experience of literally of hundreds of thousands of SMEs and other mom and pop shops to put their toe into exporting cross-border, communicating, correcting, participating in the transport, etc. And on the other end, it's been a windfall and benefit to consumers. Global consumers have more choice of product today than they've ever had in the history of mankind. And they've had more choice of prices, and they have had more choice of delivery. This is all extremely positive. So I'm very concerned about anything that will impinge or impede this opportunity from a global perspective. And if we get too carried away with taxing, exports of product under $500 a package or something of that nature, we are going to unfortunately put in jeopardy thousands of these participants. And I think that would be terrible.
I agree. Well said. So let's then think a little bit about Hinrich Foundation. It sounds like, certainly over the last 4 years, it's evolved into something bigger and better and more holistic. And so could you tell us a little bit more about what your goals are with the Hinrich Foundation? What are some of the things that you're doing now? And then how do you see things moving forward in terms of the things you'd like to be part of and things you'd like to change?
Well, thank you for asking, Doug. We have basically 2 columns of activity. Let me share with you the first, which is education. And of course, when you're in any kind of philanthropic activity, education always comes high in the pecking order of areas of that can be addressed. But we feel at the Hinrich Foundation, we feel that we bring more than just money to the party. We bring an understanding of what is needed by young aspiring individuals that wish to participate in trade. And it is making sure that the students on graduation are employment, I always call them employment ready. They know the basics of a job. They know the basics, and they have the skills that prepare them for this job. And for an example, and I feel strongly, I don't know of a company that doesn't talk about their sales and how important their sales are, and where the sales are growing, where the sales are falling, etc. I'm sure you feel the same.
Of course.
But how many management programs, how many MBA programs have a course in sales? They have courses in marketing, they have courses in finance, they have courses, but I mean, you look around the world. I mean, there are no courses saying, how do you sell? What is the sales process? What is the sales methodology? It's like everybody's allergic to the word sales. So we have our own management program. We have our own MBA, it's in global trade, which we have developed with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. It is a certified MBA program by both Australia, the Education Department of Australia, as well as in Vietnam. We hold it in Vietnam. We started in Ho Chi Minh at the RMIT campus in Ho Chi Minh. It's a very large campus, and RMIT are a very large educational center in Vietnam, with the idea that it was more centristic to other areas of Asia. So we launched this a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, of course, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure, proof will be in time, but possibly fortunately, with COVID-19, it really focused our attention, and I mean the foundation's attention, faculty attention, employers' attention, and certainly student attention on the need to go virtual. That we had to be more effective in our ability to communicate and engage and incorporate the technology. And I have to say that everybody came to the party, including faculty, and we now have probably a state-of-the-art online MBA program, a global trade program, Masters in Global Trade, MGT, in the industry. And it is a three-part program. We have the university, of course. We have students which are mostly self-selected students that are interested in international trade. And we have inclusion of employers. In other words, we work with employers at better understanding their needs, having them participate in the course, and in fact, in many cases, providing conferences or providing presentations on specific subjects. We have, every student we have on graduation has a job. We don't have unemployed graduates.
Fantastic.
So the foundation basically subsidizes this program, and then we do a couple of the semesters, and then the employers, they will self-finance the last semester of the program. And so we've had exceptional success with this, and we now hope to extend it and develop that program elsewhere. So it's probably at this juncture, it's about 50% Vietnamese, but the rest of them are from all over Asia, including we have a couple students from Europe, and we had a student from the US as well. So it's a growing program. And we participate in 17 other universities, or with 17 other universities, two or three here in Singapore and US, and the Nanyang University here in communications. We have programs and scholarships with these different universities. But we work with the universities, and we do either full or part-time scholarships with students with which have an interest in trade. It doesn't just end there. We have an alumni association with which is very active, and we're very much engaged in mentoring processes, and of course giving back. Giving back that is important for, I think, graduates and for employers, and participation. So this has been very successful, very rewarding, mind you. We have 2 or 3 of our scholars now that have went on to do their doctorates and participate in education. We have the dean of, you won't believe this, in Cambodia, the University of Cambodia, we have the dean of the communications department is a graduate. And we have a host of others that serve. And unfortunately, we have a number that are in Myanmar right now, with which we're trying to assist them, but that's a pretty challenging area. So the educational side is one focus of the foundation, and the other is, of course, the research side of it. And we look at specific areas that we regard as concerning for trade development. I touched upon one of these before, but I'll touch upon it again, and it is how trade facilitation is facilitated in this blockchain centric evolution of fintech and what have you. And it's critical, but it's critical to look at also how data is stored, where it is allowed to be stored, because that is the beginning of all of the AI. It's the beginning of all of the ability to facilitate the analytics of that data to improve on trade. So it'll become critical, and it will become more diffused over time. So this is one area that we don't take. Let me preface the statement. We don't consider ourselves the expert on all of these different themes, but we reach out for people that are deeply involved and that are specialized and that are professionally trying to do something about this, and then we assist them. We assist them by, one, supporting some of their research, or in amplifying their research. Okay, so we take on we have a marketing department that assists the individuals. Some of them are educators, some of them are within the industry themselves, some of them are in government, and then we assist them in whatever way we can to promote a dialogue or to promote the concept or the idea, as it may be. So data and digital trade is one segment. The other segment that is a personal interest to me is foreign direct investment. We have seen without question the contribution that foreign direct investment made to China. In fact, I mean, I would say that China's success was largely predicated upon FDI development in China. Now, the Chinese government were incredibly with great foresight and intelligence to be inviting all of these multinationals and contributors to China. But at one time, Doug, that the exports of China, this was not long after China ascended to the WTO, the exports of China from FDI or FEI firms was something like 65, 67%. Okay, that's what they represented in terms of China's export development.
Wow.
It was a huge growth period. And today, still, the percentage of FDI, FEI exports in China is around 30%. So 30% of the exports is a result of foreign direct investment. That's incredible. Now, just go on a bit more, that in my view, the contribution that FDI has made to China's development is in four parts. One, of course, it's the money. It's the money and the capital that is invested. But equally important, if not even more important in China, was the intellectual property. And whether that came in through agreement or whether that came in without agreement or whatever form, was incredibly important to China's development. Third, which was, in my view, an essential part of it, was management expertise and management training and management development. Because there is hardly an organization that I know, a corporate that I know, that did not put a great deal of emphasis in training local talent, participating at universities, participating in scholarships, sending Chinese students to the United States or Europe or wherever that may be, or sending them to the headquarters, for training. A huge investment. But the fourth major contributor that was made by all this FDI is that hardly without exception, these corporates brought they not only supply chain, they brought their distribution chains. They didn't have to worry about sales because most of that product that was exported went right through the same channels that they had developed for years and years and years. So sales was not an issue. The quality of product is not an issue because it was being monitored by people that were in the supply chain or in the manufacturing process. This development from a country that had little in the way of exports or economic development, by comparison to what happened in Japan, because Japan did not welcome FDI, nor did South Korea. It took them much longer. It took them, much longer to develop those economies. So I financed and I supported and I helped produce a book on inbound foreign direct investment in China. I did it because I felt so strongly about the benefits of FDI that I wanted to have a document with which that other developing countries could look at and better understand China's success and the use of FDI. And it's true to say, and everybody points it out, that there are certainly positive spillovers, but there are negative spillovers as well. There is negative spillovers when allowed. And I think that Vietnam has learned a lot from China and learned a lot from that experience. and has probably done in some ways a better job of inviting FDI, focused FDI, than China did. But in China, it's tens of thousands of foreign companies that have participated. People think, oh, it's maybe the multinationals. It's not. It's not. From Foxconn, which is a major company, mind you, but the Taiwanese invested, the South Koreans invested in China, Japan invested, everybody invested. So I think the last measure, because that statistic is no longer available out of China. But it's over $2 trillion worth of foreign direct investment into China, massive amount, and tens of thousands of companies. So my focus with the foundation, or one focus of the foundation, is the examining the benefits of FDI and how to promote the concept of FDI. There's, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, there has been a global decline in FDI by about 45, depends on how you calculate it, but between 45 and 50%. But when you really dig into the detail, what you find is that those OECD, that data includes mergers and acquisitions, and it includes greenfield investments. And if you look at the greenfield investments as a component of the total FDI trade globally, it has actually increased. And we see China doing less in the way of M&A, like, for example, in Europe. There was just a report that came out with Rhodium, you can go to look at this. But it has deteriorated from an M&A point of view, China's FDI into Europe, but the greenfield investments have increased. That's a positive outcome from the China's outbound FDI opportunities. And then there's a huge number of other related FDI activities from outbound FDI from China. But I think that there's one other statistic which is probably fair to share with your members, is that the return on FDI has unfortunately declined. And that I think that is another challenge and another contribution to the decline in overall FDI, cross-border investments. So we're doing quite a bit of research on that, and we're cooperating with a number of people that are even more invested than we are in that subject. And we have 2 or 3, so I'll just stop there for a minute. We look at, just to repeat, we look at subjects we think will substantially contribute to sustainable trade and mutually beneficial trade and economic growth. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Let me see if I can just quickly summarize, because on the website it talks about, number one, creating new generation of leaders in trade. And I think that's really the education piece, right? You're instead of like an old guy like me, 34 years in import export, why wait 34 years? Figure it out real quickly, have the school be set up so that you don't have to do these things like sales and kind of learn by mistake over 10 or 20 years, right? Learn it early, be good at trade, and now you've got a next generation of leaders that are coming out. And so I think that's probably that part of it, right? And then the research is what you talked about in terms of understanding what's going on. I presume then to what? Are you then communicating that to companies or to economic development organizations or to governments? Who's the one that benefits from that research?
Thank you, Doug. That was an oversight on my part. We have sort of a bit of a pyramid of our demographics. At the upper part of that pyramid, which is a smaller group, are policy developers. It is the government agencies. It is the apex of the world, right? that segment. Going a little bit down in that triangle, but a much larger number, is academic institutions, both the institutions and the individuals that are involved in that, in trade, which is, and also business. A lot of people involved in business are part of that readership that we have. We have our own databases on readership. And then I would say that the bottom part of the pyramid, but a very important part of that pyramid, is simply individuals, self-selected individuals that have an interest in international trade or global trade, and then also students. We have hundreds of students. I should say in the middle, there's a lot of think tanks that are involved, which we extend our research to. We promote it online. Of course, we do the usual EDMs, but we have speakers around that we sponsor, and we do a lot on social media, which is a media of choice today. But linking it back to specific subjects and specific reports.
Okay, yeah. Fantastic. Well, going forward, how what kind of legacy for yourself are you looking to leave? What kind of additional changes in the world do you want to make? And then maybe specifically, are there certain metrics or things that you're looking at to determine whether you're making progress and what you're accomplishing?
Wow. Let's see, where do I start with that question?
Sorry, that was a little bit complicated, wasn't it?
I'm not really focused on a legacy. I'm enjoying immensely what I'm doing. I think
you're doing it for fun because you enjoy it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of late in life to try to do it for somebody else. I'm doing I'm doing it for the community that I think has a huge contribution to global trade, and to harmony and to peace and development. You said it at the very beginning, that more the dependency, the less of the conflict, and we hope that is true, and we hope to be able to contribute to that effectively. Looking forward, we will continue to evolve. I mean, this is not a revolutionary. There's things you can consider revolutionary, certainly within the areas of technology, but the process that we're involved with is not revolutionary, it's evolutionary. And we were faced with some serious challenges in trade, but ultimately it needs to be solved with what my view is a much higher sense of trust. If you don't have the trust in trade or with people or individuals, you're not going to be trading with them. So we have to be able to overcome some of the conflict that exists globally, and I hope that we can contribute to a mindset that is more positively engaging than negatively engaging, because we all have more to win if we collaborate, and hopefully we're not in a loss situation. And God forbid should, and I don't even predicate, I mean, I'm not even thinking about it, that there be a conflict. It's just off the charts. You don't do what you do to overcome problems predicated upon the basis that they're going to be confrontation, right? I think that the issues that we are faced with, both at a geopolitical basis and also at an economic basis, are quite solvable. But there needs to be an appreciation that going forward, mercantilism is history. Forget it. We can't work in an environment. We have to be thinking of a mutually beneficial way forward. It's this import substitution or this protectionism is not only dangerous for global trade, but is dangerous for those that participate. And I have to say with some reservation, India is a wonderful example of a country and an economy that has been a country based upon import substitution. And look where India is at today. When you look at the comparative development in Japan and South Korea and China and Vietnam, look at India. It's very unfortunate, but there is a mindset, and we do not wish to go. We do not wish to promote that mindset.
Yeah. So are you hoping then through the research that you're able to additionally communicate these basic principles that you've articulated today, so that eventually it assimilates in? It's, I mean, you've been involved for so many years. I remember the tariffs of India. In the Teflon business, it was something like 600%. It was like, crazy stuff, protecting some local little guy who was doing it in his backyard. And it was like, yikes, what logic is there in that? And then ultimately, as in Australia's case, for instance, where they also had very high tariffs, as they lowered their tariffs, it's a funny thing. The companies there became a lot more competitive, and they became actually pretty good, many of them. So I mean, that's largely a part of it, right? Is like, let's do fair, let's do fair trade, let's reduce these barriers, and then some things are going to be made some places and other things are going to be made other places, but ultimately the consumer benefits, as you talked about earlier.
Yep, for sure.
So
Doug, we're getting to the top of the hour, and I see we have a few Q&A and chat there. We can accommodate your members.
Very good. Appreciate those of you who are watching the call. And I saw John Schultz earlier pop up, who had mentioned that he had actually worked for you in the past. And so he sends his best regards to you for sure.
Well, hello, John. How are you?
And we've got, I don't think you know Dwight Winkler, but he's another one of our members. So, in terms of maybe some additional questions that I've received from our members, I mean, one of the questions was, how can they, or is there a way for them to become involved? Most of our members are exporters or, some importers, and certainly people doing foreign direct investment. Is that a group of people that have a way of engaging in with the Hinrich Foundation? And how would you suggest they do that?
Absolutely. If any of your members are interested in either the educational element of what we do, and we're very happy to share. We are a nonprofit organization. It's an endowed foundation. We are very happy to participate and share what we do, how we do it, and if there's any way that a company would like to participate either on the educational side or on the research side, we would be delighted to accommodate. And please just drop us a line. I'm not sure if my email address is there, but please feel free to drop me a line, and I'll either answer it or redirect it in a way that we'll get back to you.
That sounds good. Yeah, and in the meantime, if you don't have a place,
I'd like to just say something. Of course, as I said, I have an FDI interest, and so if there are any of you that have history, or that you have case studies, or that you have thoughts and you would like to put forward on this, we would be more than welcome to listen and to join you in a dialogue.
Oh, that sounds good. Back to Merle's point about getting in touch with him. If you don't have access, there are certainly people within the Hinrich Foundation that are members of Global Chamber, and we have their access. Also, info@globalchamber.org will get your communication in, and we'll find a way to make that happen as well. One of the things with FDI that I've been sitting on I've been using this data point for 5 years, is in the United States, because one of the things that inspired me to start Global Chamber was to encourage people to trade and to export and to improve exports. And in the US, only about 12 to 14% of GDP is exports, and that's versus 60% for Austria, and much higher percentages for very successful exporting countries. But one of the things that I learned from mostly my career, which was largely Japan related, was the thing that happened after Japan invested a lot in the US. There was a pushback, right? There was a political push against the Japanese. And part of what I learned from all of that was, it has to be done right. Okay, don't buy Pebble Beach. That's probably not something that should be done. But the other thing is, the data point that I keep using is 5% of US companies are foreign owned. So 5%. But 20% of US exports are from those 5%. So what occurred to me, and when you kind of think about like what's really happening there, you're really kind of bringing in foreign investment, people who know the world, and they are then highly motivated and probably have the supply chains like you talked about earlier to be able to export. And bottom line is, exports are a good thing. Wherever they're coming from out of your country, that's a good thing. And so sounds like your driving force largely now is encouraging people to make the right foreign direct investments to keep trade going, to facilitate that progress.
Precisely, Doug. For the receiving country, for the company that is participating, and for global consumers, it makes a difference.
We're almost out of time, and I'll ask for a closing comment from you in a moment. But one more question that I had from one of our members that I'd like to ask is, what about some of the other regions of the world, and in particular, when you look at Africa as an example, a country that has lots of things going on, right? There is foreign direct investment from China largely, and they have a need, I think, to export and to develop export economies. How do you view Africa, and is that one of the opportunities that you see for Hinrich Foundation as well to support?
The interesting question, and of course, Africa is making substantial headway in the development, and I have to say the BRI, in part, is helping that process. There's a huge amount of investment in infrastructure and transportation, China investment in these areas, as well as focusing upon developing agriculture related. And you see out of Kenya, you see the development, the historical contribution that they make to just the flour industry in Holland. It's massive. And across the continent, I mean, there has been a huge dependency on commodity exports. Hopefully that's going to segue into more value-added product, which would be very important for Africa going forward in employment. And of course, helping avoid the migration issues or the outward immigration issues that Africa does face and Europe faces as a recipient country or recipient area. So we're very positive about the African continent as an export source, but we're also very aware of the governance issues that need attention and need development and need adherence. So it's not just about a wish, it's about, can they execute in an environment of control and of trust and engagement, and be consistent in that, and not just from one administration to the next. This is I'm speaking very generally, I appreciate, but there are success areas, but there are unfortunately those that are not so successful.
Absolutely. So we've come to the end of the hour. I wonder if you'd just like to take a minute or two to either summarize some key points or any other point that maybe you'd like to make for our members to become aware of Hinrich Foundation, and also how they might get involved, or anything else you'd like to share.
Well, first of all, Doug, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity of meeting your clients and participants. We are open to dialogue. We're open to discussion on trade, and if any of you wish to participate, we'd be we'd be very happy to. I would say that going forward in terms of the development of trade, sustainable trade, there has to be a mutual benefit that is more actively focused. It is not just export when you can and import if you have to. There needs to be more balance in both focuses. And I think at a policy level, when you're participating, you need to be very focused on both the opportunity for exports, but also the opportunity for imports. There has to be in our world today, not aid, but reciprocity. And mutually beneficial doesn't just mean monetarily beneficial. Mutually beneficial means that there are other elements of a relationship that are worth protecting, and we can sacrifice a little here if we have a little advantage there. And we need to be more concerned about our clients. We must be more concerned about the needs of other countries. I'll stop there.
Really appreciate that. One of the real takeaways here for me is the focus that you place on FDI, and the analogy or the stories you talked about with South Korea and Japan versus China and Vietnam as an example of how China and Vietnam have more positively used FDI for probably both faster growth and maybe long-term success. I'll leave you with one quick story of South Korea that relates to what you said. My first visit to Korea was in January of 1987, and I was passing through the airport in Busan, South Korea, and there was a billboard with no writing, but it was a graphic showing that if you bought foreign goods, basically your money was flying overseas. And so the message of the billboard clearly to me was, don't buy foreign goods, buy only Korean goods. But fast forward to today, where Kupang is a member of Global Chamber, it's the Amazon of South Korea, and they're looking for US and other products to bring to South Korea. So it took 34 years to create the balance that you talked about, but finally, at last it's happening there, and hopefully, can happen in other places of the world. Thank you so much for sharing so many takeaways. Really appreciate it. In my life, I would say I've probably met two really amazing people in their field. One was a fellow you probably maybe ran into along your career. Did you ever meet W. Edwards Deming by any chance?
I have not.
So the beginning of my career with DuPont, I took a 1-week course on manufacturing through one of our clients in Ohio, Yellow Springs, Ohio, a whole week with W. Edwards Deming. And it really changed my life in terms of his passion and vision and knowledge about manufacturing and what it took to become so successful. And obviously, when the Americans wouldn't listen to him, he went to somebody who would, and he went to Japan, and they listened, and they were quite successful. And at the end of his career, which is where I caught him, he was now then teaching this company and other companies what he had taught to Japan 20 years before, and now allowed them to catch up. And I have a little bit of a feeling about you in the same way, and that I don't know anybody else who has had so much international global trade experience, and now you have a platform that allows you to make even greater and bigger changes with trade and improvements in trade, something that you and I and many others on this call believe in. And so congratulations on your success, and we wish you additional success, and we'll certainly be doing our best to collaborate and support that going forward.
Well, thank you again, Doug, and have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day, and thanks everybody again for calling in today, and have a great one. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Hinrich.